Welcome to the Gravity Well, where you break down heavy ideas into small buckets you can handle. Your mission is simple. Help us work through your dilemmas in conversation and process. Together, you and your community will face your dilemmas and make the world a better place for all. In the spirit of truth, I acknowledge I am a settler. Today, I am on stolen Treaty 6 territory in the ancestral and traditional territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota, Sioux, and Métis Region 3 territory. I take reconciliation by seeking the wisdom of elders and individuals who aim to restore water, air, land, life, or community. A healthy living relationship with the earth and each other is our guide. Hi, Brad. Today I am joined by Brad Chapin. So for those of you that have been following the podcast, Brad was a part of our second episode and helped us understand what behavioral health and safety looks like, or self-regulation training. The reason why I started with Brad is because I met a woman by the name of Mary Gordy that had introduced me to Brad's work. And it really resonated with me because I think one of the base things I've experienced, especially from being somebody that worked in the oil and gas industry and is now an environmental advocate, there are a lot of beliefs that come into play, and regardless of relationships, those beliefs can sometimes prevail. And as you explained in our last meeting, if you have those strong beliefs, they can really influence how you behave and what you perceive as a threat.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to reflect a little bit on what I took away from your work, and what's carried forward for me. For one, Alex and I will often refer to the phrase vague advice.
Okay. Yes.
So, and I find that at home with my husband as well.
Yeah.
So, we'll be discussing something important to us, and we'll say, "Oh, you should just do this or this." That's very vague advice. Can you be specific about what I'm doing? But what I'm doing that's, say, triggering you or whatever that is. And I would say it comes up once a week.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
really quite aware of it now.
Good.
I feel that's
Good.
something that you really brought forward for me.
Good.
The other piece is, just being able to recognize when I am triggered,
Yeah.
if you will. So
Yeah.
when my fight or flight system is engaged. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, for my spouse as well, we can say, we can have these conversations of, I got my fight or flight system kicked in,
Yeah.
and this is what happened. So it's just being able to actually, as Mary said, identify that and see it in real time is something that I think is really powerful.
Yes.
And especially in the topics that we're carrying out in this discussion that we're having. So, addressing a worldwide transition of social and ecological reform is not a small undertaking. But to me, it's through conversation that we're really going to be able to come together and eventually make some big changes together. So yeah, those are some of the things. Is there anything from our first conversation that you would like to offer, or anything, just from your work that you're looking at recently that's different for you? Anything new for you that you want to just address out of the gates?
Just thinking about our previous conversation, I always think you never know how your work is going to be utilized. And so I developed this framework originally for just to try to do some upstream work, and no pun intended, upstream work on mental health.
Right.
And because most of my day job is downstream, I work in an acute psych hospital facility.
Right.
And so to try to do some prevention and some upstream work, and then to have you reach out and say how that information could be helpful, and having people maybe come together around a difficult topic and at least get in the same room, or kind of start those or restart those conversations on areas that both sides might feel threatened by, and just kind of call out some of those behaviors as natural human behaviors. When we get together to talk about difficult things, we're going to have these pieces of our biology and our moods interact with the discussion. It's going to impact the discussion. And so if we can just be open about that, clear about that, not vague, and then sort of normalize that process, I think it allows for us to get to some of those deeper levels of conversations that can be hard.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting that you reached out on a topic like this, and to be able to apply these skills or some of these things in that area. So yeah, that really stood out to me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it is like you said, I'm also doing an upstream effort, not necessarily on a personal level, but on a, trying to prevent a crisis of large magnitude that impacts many people. So it is very interesting that it's this prevention initiative that I think really drew me to your work, and why I really, really respect what you're doing.
Well, maybe the pun was intended.
There you go. Yeah. Well, and the other piece to it too is that you are an applied practitioner, as you've said.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to repeat what you offered in the first meeting, which is tons of respect for the academic world and the research, and you've used a lot of that in terms of pulling together your system. But seeing is believing, and I'm a strong advocate of that myself. I've thought about getting additional degrees and things like that, but I was really always very interested in being practical and being in conversation with people about the work we're doing and what it means to them, rather than becoming super strong in my discipline, for example.
Yeah.
First of all, so we're in Red Deer.
Right.
So what brought you to Red Deer, Brad?
So like I said, I do a lot of presenting and training with educators and teachers from all over the world. We've been doing a lot, of course, in the United States, but also have been to Canada several times, working with schools and districts and divisions here, and then also some work with Singapore over the last couple of years, so reaching outside of the U.S. But just around this idea of self-regulation for our kids, and can we give them practical skills to use to help manage these intense emotions that human beings feel, and we often have very little formal training in that. So to be able to bring that to education where our kids are at and get these skills on board early. But over the last 2 years, I've probably had more requests for self-regulation training for adults than for kids, which I think we all feel it, just the stress level and the different areas that we're all working in. There's conflict, there's people leaving different fields. So, there's less of us to do some of the important work. So that puts more burden on the people that are left. And so this is especially true in education and also in healthcare, which is another field that I'm closely connected to because I work in a hospital. But so a few of the educators that work here in the Red Deer area actually saw me at a national summit in the Innovative School Summit in Orlando earlier this year. And we got to visiting, and they said, we'd really like to bring this information to our area.
Awesome.
Would you be interested in coming and doing that? I said, for sure, I would love to share this information wherever people are interested in listening. I'll go. And so it was great. I got to spend 3 hours yesterday with about 100 educators from Red Deer area. Normandy School hosted us, and it was just wonderful interaction. We went through a lot of what we could cover. I like to do 6 hours, but we did 3 hours, covered as much as we could in 3 hours in the afternoon. And then I also, it's wonderful, I got to spend an hour to do a parent training for some of the parents in the local school district here. We all got together for about an hour and covered some of the same basic skills. So how can they apply this information in their homes with their kids and their families, just to improve that mental health, to help with performance, to give them more energy, that whole resilience factor, and to move beyond, like you said, kind of our tagline here is to move beyond vague advice into practical, applied skill training that you can practice and implement and measure on the ground, boots on the ground. So, man, it's been a great trip here so far. I would love to stay, hopefully get to come back and explore more of the area. But it's wonderful to have the invitation.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. So, and sorry, was there a number of schools involved, or was it the one school that hosted? I'm sorry if I missed that.
There were a number of schools, and I wish I could name all of them, but it was a large area, and it's great when you have these trainings that you can bring, not just teachers, but administration was there, and then of course the support staff was also involved. So you have all the team hearing the same information, and then that's where I think the magic sort of happens, is where they share information, after the training. A lot of it soaks in, and you start to, how can we apply this here with our third graders? Or I work with fifth graders, how's this going to look for fifth grade? And so to have the whole team, because there were only 4 or 5 of them that had traveled to Orlando, and then it's like, wow, I'd like my whole team to hear this. And then you kind of get that energy from everybody about how we can make this our own here. And that's what I really loved. I mean, we have curriculum guides, so we covered information from the self-regulation training manual, but man, when they start to bring their own ideas about how would this look here, that's where I think the magic really happens.
Yeah. So I'm curious because one of the pieces that I'm trying to focus on is how do you measure success, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm curious when, like, you just pointed to a really good example, which is, you had 5 people come and now you're here speaking to 100 people and 30 parents. So to me, just participation is one really good example of a way you can measure success in the work you're doing. You've talked about, you've taken this work to Singapore and it's not just in North America. Again, proximity, that's another one. What about uptake? Like you said, when you hear people reflect back your work in their words, I feel it's a feeling sometimes when you enter a room and you can tell whether or not something's really being absorbed or otherwise. But I'm curious, what are your ways of knowing that this work is being absorbed and used and it's evolving in a way that, or at least being adopted or expanding?
Yeah, well, one of the best compliments I think I've ever gotten, and I've had a few that are kind of top 3, and the woman that we know in common is kind of one of those ways. It's like, when you have a YouTube video that you put out several years ago and you look back at it and you're kind of like, maybe I should take that video down. Or,
Yeah.
Boy, I've changed a lot since then.
Yeah, no
I
doubt.
don't even know if I'm recognizable.
Yeah.
But I feel like I know a lot more. We grow over 10 or 15
course.
years, and your framework, whatever it is going to change, hopefully, and it adapts. And it's like, oh, maybe I would use a little different word there. But when you have a person that reaches out to you 4 or 5 years or 10 years later and said that video not only changed my life, but may have saved my life, that, I don't know. I'm not an expert in measuring success. I think there's lots of ways to measure it, but to me, that's a super meaningful piece of my existence, and I put it's right there as far as why I do the work that I do. The drive that gets me to get on a plane and go all over the place and do these things and keep writing and keep reaching out to people. But I don't want to take anything away from like last night, walking around a room of 30 parents, people that I've never met, and I'm pretty good at walking around a room and training. I've been doing speaking and training for 15 years all over the place. And it's hard to describe, but the connection that you have in the room, like with these people that I didn't know before yesterday, and they didn't know me, but to be able to connect around helping our kids and do better and feel better. And then to have them come up afterwards and say, I took something away from this. I hear things and I go to things and we listen to a lot of stuff, but I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so just to shake their hand and say, and they're looking me in the eye and saying, I took something away from this. I'm going to have a different conversation with my 14-year-old daughter, tomorrow, or we're going to be able to do things different in our house. And then you can apply that to teachers and having those conversations too. But one of the best compliments I got this year was from a 40-year veteran psychologist that's been around for a long time, and just saying, they listen to you for 6 hours, and that's pretty intimidating for me. That was always one of the things that I was worried about going out and training, was like, oh gosh, I don't know everything. I'm never going to know everything.
Yes.
And someone out there is going to say something about what we've put together that is critical. And that does happen, but it's so rare. I can't remember the last time it happened. And actually, I get more people come up, 40 years psychologists saying, I don't know how you condensed and made something so comprehensive in such a small package, because, we take years and years to teach people this stuff in graduate school training, and you've been able to break it down to where a 4th grader can learn it, or a parent with no training could take this home and apply this in a useful manner. So those kinds of things are what I like. I live for that.
It's interesting because I feel the same way. I've had people say, I really appreciate the work you're doing. And, that just being, getting those things you're right. Those are the comments that go or remind me, yep, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I'm staying on this path. This is why this is important to me.
Of course, we have more rigorous research that we're doing. We're doing a couple of good, really well-designed research projects in nursing school programs right now. And then we have all our evidence-based curriculum published in journals, but to support the program. But to me, statistics and analysis is exciting in one level, but the human connection and the real story I think you need both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you said the word magic, and I think that's something that you feel, like I said, and you know it's real. You know what I mean? I'll just give an example. When I was in the industry, the oil and gas industry, I worked at a private company for a while, and there were three of us that were, you know, the main drivers of the development work we were doing. And one day we were all doing each other's work. I was doing some geology. No, I was doing some engineering work. The geologist was looking at geophysics and anyway, we were all doing each other's work. And it was in the middle of it, I stopped and said, none of us are doing each other's original roles, and none of us had our backs up. You know, we were just questioning and working on this problem together. And it wasn't even, you know, it wasn't intentional. It just sort of happened. And to me, that is, once you experience that, you want it again.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It feels good. And maybe that is part of the measure of, you know, your own personal success, is getting that feeling. It's like, wow, we achieved this sort of really difficult thing sometimes to achieve. But, and then it feels good. It's good.
Yeah. So speaking of achievements, you finished your book. It's out, right?
Yeah, so I have, my sixth book. So we have 3 evidence-based curriculum guides for pre-K age, so young kids, and then elementary age, and then middle school, high school. And then, like I said, the last few years, we've had more requests to teach self-regulation to adults. So we started with an educator-specific version, but I love this graphic, you know, this person on this hill with this raging storm. And it's kind of like, how do I stay on this hill, you know, with this raging storm of life? It's called Self-Regulation Skill Set. It basically is a 7-week journey. So 7 skills, what we teach in 3 skill training areas of self-regulation, how to manage myself in the face of challenge. But it's 1 skill a week. It's sort of it's a journal format. So you're working through this personally, but it's also designed to, you could do this with your spouse, a partner, or a small group of colleagues, and make like a book study out of it. It's got discussion questions at the end of each chapter, and then little QR codes that take you to a video of me talking about sort of recapping the last week's skill, and then introing the next week's skill, kind of what to be ready for. And then you end with your own personal plan on these 7 skills of, how do I apply this in my life? And then able to work through that, and also share that with others if you want to. So super excited about that. Yeah,
that's awesome. So right now you said it's out for educators?
It's out for educators specifically. We'll be coming out with probably next year. I wanted to start with educators because that's where I've been working, you know, for the last several years, specifically with educators. But I'll be coming out with a more mainstream version probably next year.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll definitely be looking to that. But I will also give this to some of my educator friends, let them know that this is out there. Yeah, because, you know, I find, and I'm curious your thoughts on, we tend to overcomplicate things sometimes rather. And as you were saying, I think this is why I appreciate you so much. I've been told that I can speak about things in a simple way rather than in a complex way, which sometimes can be overlooked or underappreciated from a standpoint of, you know, someone who's very knowledgeable in an area. They can look at it as, you know, potentially, yeah, that's just basic stuff. Who cares about that? But to me, these are, you know, when I look at, we were talking before we started here, the social, environmental, and economic crisis, it's an everyone problem. And it really comes down to basic needs and basic, what does community look like to us? And all of these base principles that we seem to be overlooking these days. And like you said, I'm not surprised that there are a number of adults that are looking for these simple, logical, daily applicable methods. So yeah, do you have anything more to say on that?
That gift you have, I would say that's a gift, to be able to take really complex ideas to a layperson, because it so increases your circle of connectivity. I mean, if you are so well educated and so knowledgeable and just don't have that gift, you might be able to talk to 5 other people about this that are going to understand what you're saying. But if you're able to take those concepts that these 5 people can talk about, and then talk to another 100,000 people and explain it in a way that they can grasp and use and understand, I would say that's quite a gift. And so I've been able to try to do similar thing in psychology, because like got 200 years of complex research. I mean, you could stack that and fill up a huge warehouse of all that information, and it's just overwhelming for a person, a parent, or a teacher, a new teacher, to go out and try to figure out, how do I want to help this individual sitting in front of me the best? And if you Google ADHD or any of these other mental health issues, you get like 2.6 billion options to click on.
Right.
It's just not helpful. How do you filter through that to find something useful? So I would say, if you're able to do that, that's quite a gift.
Well, I'm working on it. I wouldn't say I've nailed this skill, but yeah, like you, I'm working on it and trying to come to a place of building a system. So again, just to remind you, and so this conversation is not just a conversation of many topics, but we're working in a method ourselves as we go. And it's just based on it's a complex decision-making course that we took, but it's rooted in the 6 W's, so including how. So, but what's interesting is that we started with the why, whereas, when you list off the 6 W's, you say who, what, where, when, why, how. Well, that's not the order that this course recommends. And it's interesting because, we always, when you're talking about a sensitive issue, people want to know why you're asking a question first and foremost.
Yes.
Right?
I always start with the why.
Yeah. So anyways, we've been going through that and trying to build this, but what came up for me when I was thinking about our conversation is, we've been having some conflict in my broader family. And as a family, we've been going through this process that we've built and trying to build this, asking ourselves these 6 questions before we go into a conversation that we know is going to be a challenge. And I think that was one of the things that I really took away from our first conversation. I was saying to you, well, but what do you do when you're triggered? And you said, take a break. Because once you're triggered, the only hope you have is to step away and get some space, right? But this prevention is really what you're trying to build in this systematic approach of addressing. So can you talk a little bit more about the 7 skills? Can you maybe just hit them in high level? What are they? And
you hit on it there, take a break, step away from that threat, because once that threat response is set off in us, remember we talked about how our brain operates, we're not engaging that thoughtful piece anymore. What we usually end up doing is damaging the whole process or damaging relationships, which is going to not get us anywhere. So the break, and sometimes it's purposeful, going out, taking our attention away from the threat, letting that threat response dissipate so that we can re-engage the challenge. This part of our brain, that thoughtful part, calm piece, rational piece, also empathy, connectivity is up in this part of our brain. So when we're down in that, reactive, what we call the lizard part of our brain, that old brainstem part, it's just going to be reactive and not thoughtful, and maybe do things like try to hurt the other person, with words, or it's going to be withdrawn, using people in difficult conversations, just push away from the table, shut down completely.
Right.
It's not going to get us where we want to be. So that's why we teach physical regulation first. We have those 3 areas we teach. So that physical part is about recognizing when that threat response is happening in me, realizing when I'm no longer really effective. That's what it comes down to. I'm not going to be effective in that state to try to solve a problem. And then to take a break. And then, of course, we give some concrete ideas about what to do during that break that can be helpful, like distraction, have a rhythmic, repetitive movement, go for a walk, get a drink, listen to some music, those kind of things that are going to be, because if you go over here and take a break and you're still thinking about the threat, it's probably not going to get you where you want to be. So that's that first step of getting calm and safe. And then that emotion regulation comes next, where we start talking about, well, what am I feeling here? What is what does the emotion connect? Because that's the energy that we need to do something. So labeling that, was I sad by what they said, or angry, or scared? Maybe there's fear. And so a lot of times anger is kind of masking, sadness and fear. So if we're able to connect, well, what is sad about that for me? Connecting with that emotion, and then how do I want to express that sadness in a healthy way versus some of the unhealthy things that we know people can do when they feel intense emotions. So being really mindful and thoughtful and concrete and proactive about how I want that energy to come out. Intentional. We're really hooked on that word lately.
Yeah. You mentioned that in the first conversation.
Yeah, it's just because you can know a lot of things. And,
right.
If you're not intentional about doing anything with it, it's great to know it, but I'd rather see it in action,
Yeah.
Otherwise it's really just up here. It's not being applied. So practicing how that energy is going to be directed. So that's our skill number 4. And 5 is that ownership piece. So not always being mindful of, if I am angry, how long do I want to stay at this level? And I like to use numbers. So do I want to stay at an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10 for 2 hours or 2 days or 2 years or the rest of my life? And who's the only person on the planet that decides when I go to a 7? And so I think it's really helpful to remind people of how much ownership and control and responsibility. No one can make me move that level, really. They can influence me, but I have ultimate control of that. So I can turn that dial a little bit if I want to. And then the last thing, and I know we talked briefly about this before, is that cognitive area of, what defines threat for me? How do I define threat? And that's our belief systems. How do I be mindful and intentional about what are the beliefs I want to carry and which ones do I want to gather evidence for and strengthen and which ones need questions still. So this is something that humans do all the time. We're looking for evidence to support our belief systems. But also we have to recognize that those belief systems define what's threatening to us.
Right.
That puts a line here. And what I really like people to know is you don't have to move that line, but I want you to know that you're the only one that can move the line.
Right.
You have the power to move it over just a little here or there. You don't have to, but there's something about knowing that you're the only one that can move that line for yourself.
Right.
That's interesting. So also recognizing that connection goes right back to the physical regulation, because if something comes across that line, it's going to be interpreted as threat. And then we go through the whole process again.
Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell.
No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. I'm curious. One of the things, I don't know if you remember, but I ran in the election as well. Yeah. So, and, I had a very large, I thought, social network before running in the election, but I didn't run for the party that was, expected to win. I ran for a party because I wanted to do something different. I know we needed to do something different here. So I was trying to find that avenue. And I look at those relationships that I built, fostered for a long time, and they were gone in a sense. That support network that I had was no longer there. So I'm curious, how does our belief system override these relationships that we build? Because I'll be honest, I relied on the knowledge that I had invested in relationships and invested in do unto others as you wish to be. I'm not going to say it right, but give back, or give and expect to get back, and all of those things. And I would say that even today, there are a number of people that their belief system is so ingrained, potentially, and these are my assumptions, where our relationship is not necessarily a value or understood as to, what my intention was, let's say. So I don't know if there was a good question in there, but if you can touch on how does your belief system override, this sort of history and you've talked about it even in our relationships with our spouses, for example. It's very easy to say the worst things to the people that you care about the most, kind of thing, when you're under threat. So can you speak a little bit about how it overrides all of this sort of, what we should have is this sort of base understanding of people and their intentions?
Yeah. So part of what I heard there was, it sounded like you experienced a major loss. I mean, that's what I would be, if I have this group, or I think I have this group, and then it's gone. So loss to me is like, it's one of those areas. I think it's probably one of the most underrated, under talked about emotions and experiences that human beings have. And yet we all have loss in our life.
Right.
It's like, I think of kids, it's like, how does a 9-year-old know what to do with loss?
Yeah.
I think, what was a 29-year-old or 59-year-old? How do you know? Where are you trained in this? So to me, loss is a huge threat. So you're going to go through the same sort of process. Our body's going to respond to loss in a way. We're going to have that biological response. It's threatening to us, especially if the loss is, I kind of put numbers to things, that if it's a big loss, we're going to have an intense, our sleep can get disrupted. We're going to have that adrenaline rush. We're going to have tension in our muscle. We're going to have all the things that could affect the way that we think because of the different areas of our brain. But also, I think, and another thing that I heard you say was that you sort of have this belief that people will treat each other in a specific way. Human beings will treat, and I heard you say that you have kind of this golden rule type of thing. And then when we see behavior or we have experiences that doesn't match that, it leaves us feeling really, really confused. And sometimes, I see this in trauma situations where we have these events happen in our life that are so in the face of what we believe, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is even possible, that people would do this to another person, or those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It can really shake our whole foundation of what we think is true.
Right. Yes.
People and the way the world works and just life in general and humanity and all those things. So when you have that happen, and honestly, that's a part where, trauma can do lots of strange things, but you have a biological response. You have lots of emotions around that. So fear and sadness. How am I going to express those things? What do I want to say to these people or this experience? How am I going to direct that energy? And it sounds to me like you put it into a cause, that's really, really important. And it kind of makes a lot of sense. We work with people on that all the time. How do you want to direct this energy in a positive way that's going to help you and help the rest of the world? And so that's sort of that emotional piece, that expression skill that we work on. And then what are you going to do to readjust? Because I don't think you want to probably go back and say, well, I guess that's not the way humanity works, but or I still want to treat people in a certain way.
Right.
And I want to see if we can influence other people to treat others as they want to be treated and those kinds of things. So you go out and promote this belief that we can still work together. But I also heard another piece in there, and you just tell me to cut off. Just about having this belief that people can disagree on topics, but still have connection. And so we don't have to lose connections because our beliefs don't align. And so I think there's something there, and I don't have all the answers to that, but that was a third sort of
point. No, you're right.
That you were bringing.
Yeah, because it does feel that way, and I was saying to you offline, there's some relationships that I do feel are severed, and not sure if that's permanent, right? But I do think that I'm experiencing an overlap between those connections versus beliefs and what, but I think it goes back to what you said in our first conversation, is how strong is that belief? If it's innate, then maybe that's enough that it overrides that connection.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, something to explore for sure. But so one other thing that came up for me here, and now this is getting a little bit into my work, so I hope you're allowed, to explore a bit. But so one of the concepts I'm really excited about it's called degrowth. And it's based on this concept of, where we have a developing miners world. So we are mining and extracting from the earth. And what this concept talks about is we need to stop doing that and start actually investing in nature. So rather than having capital, money, we put natural capital at the center of our economy, and we focus on reducing the complexity of our world and thinking more locally and building that social democracy and what we're doing. And one of the things that comes up in it is they talk about the structure that we have in society. And one of the concepts I really appreciate is ecofeminism. So they talk about the structure being, we have this sort of alpha male at the top of our current system. And then anybody who is caring for either nature or people ends up being lower in that social structure. And then women fall into that next. And again, this more dominant female is at the top of that structure, and rather a more sensitive female is at the lower part of that structure. So my best friend years ago was talking about, my journey in the industry.
Yeah.
And so, I've had moments where people have appreciated what I was working on and they've been supportive. And then, as she said, then the lawn gets mowed. The structure comes back into place. I'm a worker bee. I'm not a leader. Therefore, I get reminded that I'm, no, you just do as you do and you conform.
Gotcha.
So, and so what this degrowth speaks about is the opportunity to restructure society in a way where caring is center to the work we're doing. So, I mean, obviously this is pivotal to the work you're doing.
For
sure. And I guess, do I have a question in here for you after that? I'm just curious if you've experienced any setbacks. Maybe let's go there in your work. What are some of the setbacks you've experienced, and what are some of the ways that you've overcome those?
Just so interesting that you brought that up, because in healthcare, I was on the flight up here. I was just thinking, and we're going through, just like everybody else, we go through difficult budget seasons and sessions, and we're not in super great economic times. And then in nonprofit healthcare work, it's like
everything's stacked against you, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I was just having this thought, and we hadn't talked about this, but I was just thinking about, wow, I feel like every meeting I've been in for the last 2 months has been about finances, or been about something other than caring. Patient care. I look at the agendas for a lot of our meetings, and I was just kind of reflecting on that on the way up here. It's like, wow, why is 90% of our meetings around, what is important? Like you said, what's at the center? What's driving that? Should be patient care, right? And
people, outcomes, results.
Right, the people, right? And of course, the argument then is, well, if we don't have the funding, we can't take care of patients. But you would think it would be at least equal, the conversation, and I get that they are connected to each other, but what's the vision, and where's the focus, and where's all the energy going? And I do think that signifies what's most important to people. What's on the agenda when we talk about what's on. Yeah, we absolutely have setbacks, and I think you look at education, and healthcare. I really see that similar tracks over the last few years, especially since the pandemic. Just trying to redo our work in different ways.
Yeah.
And not having support to do it. And so you really have to get creative, and you also have to be practice your resilient skills. I don't believe people are like born resilient or not resilient. Human beings are pretty darn adaptive and resilient. And so some of us have learned skills and practice skills, and some still need to have exposure to those skills and practice. But wow, we don't have a shortage of setbacks and challenges in our areas. But I think your resilience and your ability to acknowledge, the skills that it takes to do this, and also set forth kind of some clarity around what the issues are, and then also take proactive steps to connect around these issues, or at least keep the conversation or restart the conversation is really admirable.
Yeah, I like how you discussed being creative, because I've paid a little bit of, well, not a little bit, I do pay attention to what's going on in the education system. I have 2 kids in high school now.
Okay.
So and one of to me it's at a point where there has to be radical changes in terms of support, and the idea of being creative and looking elsewhere where it's not available, and especially not funded, I think is a big piece. And I love that you're meeting with parents, because I think that is one of the most untapped areas that we have, is to try and increase parent involvement again. I think, of course, as you were saying, people are busy. The system that we work in is so busy, it's hard for anyone to even come up and look at what's happening. But what I appreciate about the work you're doing is it's not complicated. It's very bite-sized, tangible pieces that a parent can really feel empowered to support their teachers and support their kids. So do you have anything more to say around that? just around
No, I
support.
just kind of what it triggered for me was, I think you were talking earlier about localizing some more of
Mhm.
these decisions and things and bringing some of that.
Right.
Because I see some of that happening in the States with education right now. There's some really intense conversations going on around public schools versus
Right.
private schools, and people
Yes.
forming more community-based schools
Right.
for their kids, whether it's a faith-based organization that's at the center of it, or just a neighborhood where parents are coming together saying, public school is so challenged right now that maybe you have to get creative and think of other alternatives if we're not going to support this one well enough to make it effective. So, wow, really intense discussions, but important discussions for kids
Right.
in the future of education.
Yeah, I really think that we're on the verge of a lot of changes when it comes to the education system. Like you said, we've compartmentalized the system in so many ways, like you said, between private schools and religious schools and specialty schools and sports schools. And, there's so many variations, and yet they're all overloaded. It really feels like simplifying and localizing is going to be a very powerful method. So I'm just so glad that you're taking this work and coming to close to my hometown. It's so nice to see you. So is there anything, Brad, that we didn't cover that you want to touch on before I ask you a couple more questions?
I think so. I can't think of anything. Well, it was a great conversation. I think we kind of covered a lot, definitely from your world, and it's funny to hear your world, how it intersects with my world.
Mhm.
Sort of commonalities and different challenging situations and how they have things in common. So,
Yeah. And so what's next for you? Like how, what's on your agenda? I like to hear what people are working on going forward. So I mean, obviously you're socializing this work, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And if you're interested or anybody's interested in taking a look at that book, of course, we want feedback. This is our first go at an adult curriculum. So I like to hear back, what's working well, what's not, were there parts that were difficult to get through, what was most impactful. So wanting some feedback on that, because we continue to make things better all the time. But right now, pretty exciting. We're looking at, because what we found is that, first of all, we're getting really good data from our college kiddos, our people in, they're adults, they're not kiddos.
Yeah, it's okay.
Older, so.
No, I feel it too. My son's going to be 18. I'm like, no, he's not. That's not right. Yeah.
They are kids to me, but these people that we're preparing to go out of the workforce in healthcare and also in education. And what we found is that these courses, the curriculum for them doesn't include this information. So it's like, how do we expect these professionals to go out, do this work? It's really difficult, challenging work, healthcare, education. There's other areas, but those are the two that we're focusing now, because it's so broad and it impacts so many. Those are two of the largest, employer.
Right.
Those are just two huge professions worldwide, education and healthcare. And if we're not preparing people to manage their own emotions in the workplace, we just have super high expectations that they know how to do it, but they've never been taught or practiced. So we're working on, right now we're teaching in a couple of nursing schools, but also have some visits scheduled where we can take this curriculum as part of a leadership course or part of one of their curriculum to be able to teach these skills and practice these skills as they work toward their degree. So they're going out into the workforce, at least with some exposure and practice to this skill set. I'm really excited about that. Instead of waiting for them to get disengaged and experience burnout and all that, have family problems and take, that stuff home with them and all that, why can't we give them some of these skills up front? So that I hope over the next year or so, we have a curriculum out there that people can use for.
That's awesome, Brad. So it sounds to me like you really focus on the gaps, like you look for where the voids are in these areas and try to make sure you're filling those voids. That's fantastic. I do want to expand a little bit on the word intention, because there's good intention and there's bad intention. And so actually I'll back up and give you a concept so Alex and I were having discussion around karma.
Yeah.
And I was saying, it's funny that, the expression is karma is a bitch. And I was like, because to me, karma is a friend.
Yeah.
If you invest in things and you think about the consequences, Karma is actually a very important and powerful friend for you if you pay attention to it.
Yes.
And Alex said, well, it depends on the intention. And I said, you're absolutely right. So he was talking about, he said, because I said, yeah, there's two sides to every coin. And he said, no, there's actually three sides to every coin.
Mm.
And that
That's
edge
true.
is,
Yeah, the
is
edge.
where we come together, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, can you expand a little bit about, and so what I hear, I'll just tell you when you say intention, to me, it's being really thoughtful about, yes, I know this thing. Yes, I want to address this problem with this person, but what am I expecting to come from it? What am I hoping to come from it? How am I hoping to influence? Whatever that is, now I'm getting really wordy, but yeah, describe for me, when you say intention, what are you asking of people to think about?
So I'm asking, so in my world, we talk about conscious and subconscious and all of these things, and reactivity and proactivity. Reactivity in our world, self-regulation, often doesn't lead to success, especially in the face of conflict or social emotional challenges. So just totally simplify, our framework is really about reducing reactivity.
Okay.
And so if you're intentional, that means, like you said, you're thoughtful, you have a plan, you've practiced probably before, and you're going to apply a skill.
Right.
You're going to thoughtfully, and I use the word mindfully, do a lot of work in mindfulness training and just myself and my own life and gratitude practice and those things. But I can know a lot about gratitude. I can read some books on it. But if I don't sit down and write down 2 or 3 things that I'm grateful for, that's what I mean about being intentional.
Right.
I can have quotes and posters all around the room with cliches. And for karma, for example, if I don't practice good intention with people, or I don't put it into play intentional, that's what I mean is actually action-based.
Right. Okay.
Conscious, action-based work that we do. So yeah, karma is an interesting thing in the behavioral health and in the world of psychology. It's like I don't know, maybe you want to go here or not, but so in my world, working in, I would like to believe that that's true too, and that the way that works is you put good things out and you get good things back. I think for the most part, for most of us, that does work that way. But in my world, people come to us with lots of traumatic things that happen in their life, and then if we were to kind of say,
right, that's karma. No. Yeah, no, fair enough, because we can't control what comes at us, and you're right.
So
a lot of
what did
people
I do
will
wrong
own that.
to
Like,
get
yeah,
this to
exactly.
happen to me? So we have to be real careful about how we
Yeah,
apply
excellent
that
point.
rule, but
Yes.
that belief system.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that, because you're right. There's a lot of things, especially to really good people, that happen that are
Yes.
just not.
Bad things happen to good people, and
Yeah.
that is true, especially when you work with, and it doesn't matter the age, bad things happen to all kinds of people. And you can live a really good life and do a lot of good things for people and still have bad things happen.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so Alex will be
Yeah.
glad that you you offered that point. No, and yeah, so what I heard, and I'm just going to offer, like, for example, this meeting, I rewatched our video before we met, put out some questions in advance so that we would be comfortable with what we're talking about. To me, it's all about setting people up for success rather than going in just blind. What are we going to talk about? And then you and I are fumbling and wondering what comes next, right? So I totally. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I learned that from one of my presidents at a company I worked for long ago. When she did presentations, people would say, "You're so natural at this." And she would say, "Well, no, I was up till 4 a.m. the last night preparing for this." You know what I mean? Most things, even if they appear natural, it's from a lot of effort, a lot of intention, right?
Yes, practice.
Yeah.
Sure, you can't expect a skill to be very good if you don't practice. And
right.
That's why I think a lot about behavior. I always compare it to a sport, basketball or something. I just said to our basketball team, well, try harder, do better next time. And we didn't do any practice. We're not going to do any practice.
Yeah.
It would be terrible.
Right. Or even
I've seen, or it could be worse. That vague advice. It would be just terrible. So yeah, practice. Well, for one, it adds safety. It adds all kinds of things from the framework.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sports is such a good way to look at these problems, right? Because
good analogy sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I've watched my kids. I played sports, and I've watched my kids play sports, and it's interesting because you'll have a game that goes awry, And then you watch the practice and you're going, they're not addressing that thing that came up in that last, right. So to your point, it's not just about practice, it's about that intention of what are we trying to fix? What is the problem we're trying to solve together? All of those great pieces.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you said kind of earlier, the why, the what, the how, then applying that intentionally.
Yeah.
Because you can talk all the way around it, but not do something.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just going to reiterate what you've been saying about your work, Brad. I think this is central to a lot of the issues that we have, is that we're not looking at those base principles, those base skills, making sure that people actually are capable before we throw a bunch of things at them. And I see that everywhere. Of course, it's, healthcare and education are primary to every society, but I just went camping with my family, and I ran into a guy that works in the industry, and I was explaining some of the bigger things that I've heard. And he said, I'm just so busy that because I said, you came here to get away, and I'm telling you something, kind of big and important. And he said, to be honest with you, it was nice to actually think about something else than the next quarter, right? Because I think that's a big part of what is driving this lack of base principle work, is that everybody's so busy with all of these tasks and expectations.
Yeah, you can lose sight of the bigger picture sometimes. Just in survival mode.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like that you showed that, Brad, because that was one of the things that Mary said that was really helpful for her, is she could actually feel that physically. She said that when she was feeling suicidal, that she actually felt pressure in the bottom of her head. And it's, to me, I've noticed that when I am being intentional with my words, I actually look to this part of my brain. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, what I find is it's so unique and individual. I just love hearing, especially when you talk to a fifth grader about, where do you feel in your body when you feel upset? And they describe it to you. It feels like nails on a chalkboard, or I just feel like this rush of heat, or I get, this pain right here, or I feel like my shoulders are up to my ear. Everybody, it seems like it's so unique,
right,
and individual.
I guess.
I've heard all kinds of interesting descriptions of that. But the point is having that individual know what that feels like and to be able to describe it, notice it, feel. Yeah. It's can be life-changing for sure. You can't regulate something if you're not aware of it.
Yeah. One of the things I learned several years ago was, like you said, to name the feeling. And it's funny because for me, I feel it in my stomach. My stomach will get in knots, and I'll think, okay, what's bugging me? And then I'll try and name it. And if it doesn't go away, I'll keep trying to name it. I'll keep saying, no, I'm worried. No, I'm scared, whatever it is, right? And eventually I'll feel it release once I finally identify what the problem is. So it's really just that exercise of diving in on it. Okay. Well, this has been great. I want to make sure you get on your flight. So I really appreciate you taking the time for me. And Alex does offer his regrets, but he said he's happy to offer some words of radio.
We'll all get together.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Brad. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
This was wonderful. I always just tell people, take care of yourself, and there's a lot of hope, I think, in understanding just a little bit of clarity and understanding about basics of human behavior, combined with some skills. To me, those two things equal a lot of hope. And so I always want to send that message of hope out to people, that there are things that we can do that can help us and ourselves and others feel better and do better.
Awesome. I'm so grateful that you're here in Alberta, that your work is spreading here, that somebody took the effort of inviting you, and that it was a good turnout, all of those wonderful signs that your work is growing. And I'm excited to spread the word about your book. And I will be jumping on the public version when it's available. And we'll keep in touch. Hopefully we can have a conversation again then.
Yeah, sounds great. Looking forward to a return trip.
Okay.